96a, about 6-7 lines down from the wide lines. Amrler of Achler, Breder of Evil or Ravashi. Okay, so let's just rewind a little bit. We had two questions about Ba'al of Yomai. One involved a husband and wife, and the other one involved an owner and a messenger. In the case of a husband, the question here is, how do we look at the husband's ownership of his wife's nichs and alug? Let's say his wife, let's say somebody borrows something from his wife, let's say her car, and at that moment, the husband is working for that person. Is that ba'al of Yomai or not? So the husband has a right to use his wife's car. Is that considered an ownership or not? Moreover, let's say a guy rents his friend, a bulldozer, and he says, "By the way, I have this worker. He's gonna run the machine. He's gonna go get the machine for you." So there's a worker representing. Is that considered a shliach? And it's considered as if the owner is working for the renter at the time of the loan. So that's the question. Okay. Amrullah Ravacha Breder of Evil Ravashi. So Ravacha Breder of Evil says Ravashi. Baal pluked the Rav Yechon Mishlakish shliach. I'm sorry. One second. Baal pluked the Rav Yechon Mishlakish. Shliach pluked the Rav Yonasan of Rav Yasha. A husband is debate between Rav Yechon and Mishlakish. A messenger is debate between Rav Yonasan and Rav Yasha. Let's explain. Baal pluked the Rav Yechon Mishlakish. A husband is debate between Rav Yechon and Mishlakish. The Itnar learned. A guy buys a field for the rights to plant it. So he has what we call kinyan paris. He owns the fruit of the property, even if he doesn't own the actual property.
So he bought it.
He bought it just for the fruits. So it's sort of like a lease.
Oh, okay. He didn't really just buy.
He doesn't own the field. He owns the field just for the fruit. Okay. Now, the law in general is that if a guy, the first fruits of the season are taken off and given to a kohen as part of the mitzvah called bikurim. When you bring the bikurim, if you get to the temple, then you have to read a set of verses. One of those verses requires you to say, Ve'es ha'adama asher nasata lanu, and the land that you've given to me. That means that if you rent the field, you do not bring bikurim, because you can't make that statement. Well, what happens if you own the field for just the fruits? You make that statement or not? So this is a debate. Rabbi Yochanan says maybe b'kaira you bring the bikurim. Why? Because Rabbi Yochanan says kinyan paris and kinyan lagufdami. According to Rabbi Yochanan, because owning the fruit is like owning the item is the main form of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, a husband is considered the main owner in his wife's car, and therefore, if his wife lends out the car, and at that moment he is working for the lender, that would be ba'al of Yomai, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. However, Shlakish says maybe the Enikera he brings bikurim, but he cannot read. And let's explain. Rabbi Yochanan maybe bikurim kinyan paris kinyan aguftami. Rabbi Yochanan says you bring the bikurim and you read the set of verses because he holds that owning the fruits is like owning the main part of the property. He says that this is not the main form of ownership, and therefore you don't bring bikurim. And similarly, the release of ba'al of Yomai would not be applicable. Meaning, if the wife lends out her car, and at that moment the husband is involved with the lender, working for him. I'm sorry, he's working for the borrower, not the lender. The husband is working for the borrower at the time that his wife lends the car, and then the car gets damaged. The borrower is according to Rish Lakish, the borrower is not exempt from paying. He must pay. According to Rabbi Yochanan, he would be exempt because of ba'al of Yomai. Okay, that's the first entry. Shliach, a messenger. Plukta de Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yasha. That's the debate between Rabbi Yonasan and Rabbi Yasha. Tanya, we learned. Ha'omer la'apotropos. Kol ha'nedarim shtehei ishti nederis mekan ad she'ovim milakom plani hafrla. Okay, we spoke about it. We learned the laws in nedarim. A husband has the ability to negate many of his wife's nedarim. A neder is a type of vow, sort of a personal vow. So he tells this person, my wife makes any nedarim, just negate them. And he negated them. I would think that negation is valid. The husband will decide to validate them or to invalidate them, to negate them. It's the opinion of Rabbi Yasha. In other words, Rabbi Yasha holds you cannot appoint a messenger in the capacity to negate vows. Why? Because he holds that shluchai shel adam kamaisai, the general principle that a messenger acts on behalf of the one who sent him, is not a complete and literal description. Doesn't mean that you actually are exactly the same as the guy who sent you. You're
all the same responsibilities. His responsibility is different for you were saying. That's just
I'm not sure. Maybe.
Okay. All right, maybe not.
I don't know.
Okay.
But the idea is that for an agent to represent the one who sent him, he sort of acts as a representative who is like the original person, but not exactly like the original person. And Rabbi Yonasan says, we find everywhere that a messenger is like the original one who sent him, like the owner, the owner of the person who sent him, exactly like him. Okay, same thing would apply to a guy who has a business, right? So he rents out machinery. If you have such a business, by the way, you should know this law. Either in the contract negate the law of bavametzia, or to make sure that it's known that the guy who drives the bulldozer out from the backyard, or the rental car or whatever it is not acting on your behalf. Otherwise, it could be bavametzia. If you sign the rental contract while the guy is driving the car to the front, that could be bavametzia. And then actually the renter would be exempt from everything. Make sense? But if you want to say bavametzia doesn't make sense, that can be very sympathetic to that. Yeah. But that would be bavametzia.
Okay.
Not that bavametzia is released. Bavametzia is still.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still a good question. Why exactly? So now we have a variation on the theme of shluchah shalom kamaisai. Instead of the guy's messenger, his employee or something like that, who was it? It was the guy's slave. So Rav Ilish L'Rovo. A guy says to a slave, I'm loaning you out together with the ox. Mahu. What's the story? It's a question according to either opinion about what the status of a shliach is, an agent. Let's explain. Let's say you'll say that an agent, he is exactly the same as the one who he represents. This is true only of a proper messenger, because a proper messenger he's a bar mitzvah. He's somebody who's able to do mitzvahs. Why is it so important? Who cares? Because the Torah specifically indicates to us that in order to be a messenger, you must be able to perform mitzvahs. A non-Jew cannot act in this capacity as a messenger. Okay. But maybe a slave who does not have the ability to do mitzvahs, he's not considered your agent, and therefore, if he doesn't represent you, there's no issue of bavametzia. Idilma, or do we say however, according to the opinion that says that an agent is not a direct representative of the one who's sending him, maybe that's true of an agent, because he in general doesn't take the law of an agent representing the one who sent him so seriously. right? However, there's another principle with regard to a slave. What do we say? Aval eved yad rabbi domi. We say that if a slave acquires something, it's acquired for his master. So it's in a different sense, a slave is also like a representative of his master. And maybe that would be sufficient to determine that should the slave be involved at the time of the loan, it constitutes ba'al of yomei. So Amar Lei, so it gets even better. Mistaver yad eved ki yad rabbi domi. It makes sense that a slave is exactly like his master. If you lend out your slave at the time of the loan, it's like you lent out. It's like you were working with the master, which means that you're exempt because of the laws of ba'al of yomei. Boy, Ram Rachamo. What?
No, I just.
No problem. Boy, Roman Barchamo. Roman Barchamo says, I'm also.
But isn't Shliach normally for a specific purpose?
Oh, good question.
Yes.
So it's not a full representative. It's only related to that item.
Yeah, correct.
He doesn't
Now-
have durable power of attorney.
Correct. So even power of attorney is usually limited to a specific set
Right,
of parameters. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, in general, I would say that's probably the best distinction you can. Yad eved ki yad rabbi is, first of all, it's also relatively speaking limited. It has to do with the ability of the slave to acquire. Why exactly that turns something into ba'al of yomei? It's not so clear to me. What does one have to with another? Why is that the determining factor of ba'al of yomei? I'm not sure. Shliach, at least that if you're acting on his behalf in a capacity, then that should be sufficient. Because you don't need the owner to do everything for you at the moment. That if he's making you a coffee, by the way, it's good strategy. If you're borrowing an item, then you have the owner make you a coffee while you take possession of the item. You'll be exempt. You have ba'al of yomei now. We'll talk about it more in a few minutes. Okay. Boy, Ron Barchama. So Ron Barchama, the following question: Baal b'nechsei ishtay. A husband with regard to his wife's assets. Shoyel hava or sefer hava. Okay. Do we consider him a borrower or a renter? Meaning. So we said that a husband is allowed to use his wife's assets. His wife has a car. Is he considered as if he's renting the car or as if he's borrowing the car? What's the difference? Let's say the car. Somebody else destroys the car. Is he liable or not? If he's a renter, he's not liable. He's only liable if it has some amount of fault could be ascribed to him. But if he's a borrower, he has utter liability. Amarava, so Rava says, the fum chorfa shaveshta. According to the sharpness is the mistake. Meaning, you're trying to say that, wow, the husband is really so close to his wife, he's as if he's a borrower in all her assets. 1 second. But if he's a borrower in all her assets, you know what else it means? It means that it's ba'al of yomei too. If he's a borrower, then if you consider them to be like so close that they're always borrowing things from each other, well then she is always working for him. So it's always a she'ela b'bailam. So it's true that he borrowed her car, but actually she was working for him at the time that he borrowed her car. So the actual liability is zero, because ba'al of yomei. And moreover, even if you'll say he's a renter, schiras b'bailami, it's still they still work for each other, and specifically the woman has the responsibility of sort of doing most of the running of the house, at least if it wasn't specified otherwise, and therefore it's schiras b'bailam. It's renting with the owner working for you. It's the same thing as ba'al of yomei. Okay. So Gemara says, so that's clearly not going to work. So clearly, a husband is not liable because of ba'al of yomei. He's always exempt because he always has the ba'al of yomei. What's Ram Barchama's question? The order mine para v'hadar nasfa. First, he rented from her an ox, and then he married her. Shoyel hava or seicher hava. Is the marriage a borrowing or renting? Let's explain. So he rented it from her car, right? Then they get married. If it's a borrowing, so the borrowing displaces the renting, and now we have ba'al of yomei. and he's exempt entirely. Ideal, or do we say no? Or do we say he's marriage is a renter, therefore the original rental is still valid, and that rental does not begin with the Baal of Yomai, because they weren't married at the time. So the Gemara says, so I don't understand. Why is it that the borrowing uproots the renting, but the renting doesn't uproot the renting? Why do we consider the marriage to be a new event of renting or borrowing, and that event uproots what happened previously? Okay, so Gemara says, so what was the Gemara's new version? What exactly was Rabbi Chama's question? She rented an ox from somebody else, and then they got married. And according to the rabbis, the Amri, they say, Shel Mashal Masaycher. Okay, so let's explain this debate. We spoke about this debate in the past. So here's the question. I rent an animal from you, Jules, and then I loan it to Steve. Okay, and then a helicopter crashes on it. Okay, so now I should be exempt because I'm an Inus. And Steve should have to pay me because he's a shayl. So the rabbi's opinion is that that's exactly what happens. I'm exempt to pay you, to pay Jules, and Steve has to pay me. However, basically says, what do you mean? I'm going to make money off your animal? No, not going to happen. Steve has to pay Jules directly. Okay. Now, according to the rabbis, we consider Steve's borrowing from me to be entirely legitimate and not connected to anybody else. Therefore, the husband's borrowing from his wife is exactly the same, right? Wife borrows from foreigner, stranger, and then the husband borrows from his wife. So that borrowing from the husband to his wife is a she'ela b'bailam, and therefore the husband is exempt. The woman is liable, right? Let's say the woman borrows the ox from a stranger. The husband borrows the ox from the woman, but that's Baal of Yomai. So therefore, if the animal dies, the husband is exempt and the woman has to pay. Does that make sense?
I didn't understand, but it
Okay.
makes sense.
So that
Two different things.
okay. So just like when Steve borrowed the animal from me, that was complete and total borrowing, and it was disconnected from Jules. And the proof that it was just disconnected is that I actually make money on this ox. So then, of course, the husband is exempt from this loan because it's she'ela b'bailam. However, what's the question? According to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, the Amar Tachsa Parah l'Bailam. According to Rabbi Yossi, Steve doesn't actually borrow the animal from me. He borrows the animal from Jules. How do we know that? Because he actually has to pay you. It's true that I loaned him the animal, but the loan we don't consider me to be the real originator of the loan. We consider you, who didn't lend out your animal, you rented it to me. That rental sort of carries you over to have a direct relationship with him. And therefore, he's obligated to pay you. So similarly, with the husband, the woman borrows the ox from the stranger. But now that the husband borrows the ox from the woman, that connects him back to the original owner. And therefore, there's no release of Baal of Yomai here. The fact that the woman was working for the husband at the time of the loan is irrelevant because you're connected back to the stranger. The husband is connected to the stranger. And that's the question. Well, is he or isn't he? Is he considered? I'm sorry, he is connected to the stranger. But is he connected as a borrower or is he connected as a renter? So Rava says, well, actually, he's in neither category. He is a buyer. He bought it from the woman. Like we see from Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina, the Amar Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina. Be'usha hiskinu ha'isha shemachar b'nichse melug b'chai b'ayla umeisa habal meitzim yad halakuchas. In Usha, they made a law that if a woman sells nichse melug assets in her during her husband's lifetime, umeisa, and then the woman dies, the husband can take away those assets from the buyers. Let's explain. So the woman got married; she has a car, right? And the husband's driving the car. One day they get mad at each other, and the woman decides to sell the car. Fine, she sells the car. A couple years later, she dies. The husband can take away that car from the buyer because she had no right to sell it, because the husband had kinyan paris over it. He had the ability, he had the right to use it. She therefore does not have the right to sell it. And moreover, if she dies, the husband gets to keep the car. So therefore, the husband can take away the car from the buyers. What we see from here is that the husband is also considered to be a buyer. The husband's ability to use his wife's nichse melug, his wife's car, is that of a purchase. When they get married, he has the same law as one who purchased the car. Obviously not the car, but the right to use the car. He is a purchaser, and therefore he would be exempt if something happened to the animal, and the woman would be liable.
So originally, the stranger borrowed the car
Lent.
from- Lent.
No. So going back in the original scenario, the stranger lends an animal to the woman. Then the woman gets married. What was the husband's status? Is he a borrower or a renter? According to Rabbi Yossi. Now, let's explain. If he's a borrower, in a case of an inus, he pays directly to the stranger. If he's a renter, he's actually exempt, because a renter is exempt from inus,
Right.
and the woman has to pay because she's a borrower, right?
Okay.
And now if he's a buyer, if he's a lekuchais, then same story. He's disconnected from the original owner, and the woman has to pay for the damages.
And he doesn't have to pay her because he's a buyer.
How could you go from a borrower to a buyer? I mean,
So
what
it's sort of-
makes you go to
Yeah. The question really is, how do we look at a marriage? So in a normal marriage, without any otherwise specification, so you have an agreement, the husband is allowed to use the wife's stuff. How and why? What's the framework for him to use her stuff? So you propose, perhaps he's considered a borrower. It's as if he borrowed all of her stuff the moment they got married. Perhaps he's considered a renter, right? Because there's mutual obligations to each other in a marriage.
Mhm.
Or thirdly, and finally, we have perhaps he's a buyer. So by getting married, it's sort of as if he buys a right to use her stuff.
Okay,
He obviously isn't a buyer because he didn't buy it.
right.
But we look at it, we look at his right as the right as if it was purchased. Okay. Boy Rachamo. Similar question. Baal b'nechse ishtay mimal. Okay. So basically they got married. The wife ended up having assets that belonged to the temple fund, hektish. How did she get those assets? Could be her father was a custodian. Maybe the woman's father was a custodian for hektish. He died without any other children. So the woman inherits her father. And her father died suddenly. They don't realize that a bag of money in the house was actually hektish money.
Mm.
And they only figured it out later. And the husband used that money. Who is Mael? Who is Mael b'hektish? Who here is the one who violated the laws of hektish?
Mm.
So there's a lot of guilt to give around her. So let's see who we can pin it on. So Amarava, Man Limel, who should be guilty? So let's propose. Limel Baal, maybe the husband should be guilty. Dehetera nichale delikni, isur loy nichale delikni. It's not fair to pin the blame on the husband because he only wants to use that which is permitted to use, not that which is prohibited to use.
Mhm.
Next proposal. In a second. Timel ihi, maybe the woman should be mile. The teranami loy nichale delikni. So the Gemara says she can't be mile because she doesn't either want to acquire anything that belongs to hektish. So whose fault is it? Well, maybe it's the court's fault for allowing the law of nefsim alug.
Mm.
It's the court's fault for making the law that a husband can use his wife's stuff. So maybe the court of that generation, they're the ones who are guilty. Samara says, well, that can't be because ki avdu rabbanan dekanta of amru bala keach havel Leheterali sur le'avad rabbanon dekanta. The rabbis only did this for that which is permitted, not for that which is prohibited. So why is it the rabbi's fault? Okay, so Elam Rava, so Rava says Baal Mal, the husband is Mael. However, the Kishayotzi Miyat. The Kishayotzi. Once he spends it. Midahava, it's just like a Moitzi Mois Hektish L'chulin. The guy has money of Hektish in his possession. He's only liable from Elo once he spends it. So if the husband spends the wife's assets that she brought into the marriage, then he would be Mael B'Hektish. Okay. Now we sort of pause here, and now we.
You have all this money, then just sits it, can't get spent.
So you have to eventually give it, transfer into the custody of Hektish. But while it's in your custody, before it's transferred, you're not moil by just being in your custody, unless you spend it. And the same thing is true of the husband. Once the husband spends it, the fact that it's in his custody does not make him moil by Hektish. Only once he spends it, then he's moil.
Okay.
He's misused Hektish. Okay, this is off subject. The question here is the law of she'ela, of borrowing. So we said a borrower has to pay even for einus, even for events that are beyond reasonable control. What happens? You borrowed an animal, and the animal got weaker because of the work. You plowed a field, and now the animal's weaker. Rav Chilkiah said, 1 second. Well, what happens if it dies in the course of normal work? He was plowing the field, the animal drops dead from the work. The question of what happens if the animal got weaker presumes that if the animal died, you would be liable. And therefore, it makes sense to ask, well, what if the animal didn't die, got weaker? Would you be liable or not? However, that's a fundamentally false assumption. Why? Because I didn't borrow an animal to sort of keep him in a tent and hang him up as a display item. I borrowed him to use him. So I expect that the animal should be usable, and therefore I should be exempt if in the normal course of use the animal died. And therefore, no difference whether the animal dies or whether the animal gets weaker. Whether the animal got weaker or it died because of the work, you're exempt. I didn't borrow it to hang it, to put it up in the tents for everyone to see. And in both cases, you're exempt. A few stories here. A guy borrows an axe. It broke. He went to Rava. Go bring witnesses that you used the axe appropriately. You were chopping wood and the axe broke. But if, however, you were chopping people's cars with the axe, right, or knocking down concrete boulders with it, then no, then you'd be liable. What happens if there were no witnesses? The guy says he was chopping wood, but actually the owner suspects something else was going on. What's the story? Toshma. So let's see. There was another story of a guy who borrowed an axe from his friend, and it broke. And he went to Rav. He said, go buy him a new axe. So Rav Kahana Ravasi says to Rav, Dina Haki, is that the law? The Shosik Rav and Rav was silent. Okay, the issue here at hand was not the issue of Meitzah Machmas Valacha. The issue was that apparently, from what the best I can understand, it seems that there's two parts to the axe. There's the handle and there's the head. Now, even though the handle broke, the head is usable. And the handle might be usable for something else as well. So actually, you should pay the difference in value between a broken axe and a new axe. And you should not be paying a straight new axe. And the Gemara says, indeed, you give the guy the broken axe, and you pay him the difference in value between a broken axe and a workable axe. Okay. And similarly, if this guy cannot bring evidence that he used the axe appropriately, he would have to pay the difference between a broken axe and a new axe. Okay. How do they translate davlo? No, before that. Third line. No, it's a scenario before that. Scenario right before that.
Bucket,
Rather
bucket.
told him.
A bucket. Okay. Who gave the shul davla mechaver? He borrows a bucket from his friend. Itbar, the bucket broke. Also came to a papa. So he went in front of a papa. He says to him, I sounded like Shauna's pay. Go prove that we're using the bucket appropriately. After and you'll be exempt. Okay, now you have some interesting stories. Who gave the shul shuner mechaver? So just to tell you the story here. It's a little bit personally revealing, but in the yeshiva where I went to, so it was a bit of a fly-by for high school, a bit of a fly-by-night place, and to ensure that the yeshiva was free of mice, there was a local cat that was enlisted, and the yeshiva used to feed the cat, and it would hang around. It would walk around the building, and most specifically the basement where the food was, and he would walk around. And if there was mice, hopefully it would take care of the mice. I'm not sure how good of a job it did, but I presume it probably did some job because the mice at that point weren't crazy. Okay, so they had the cat, the yeshiva cat, right? So they borrowed the cat, and what happened? All the rats ganged up on the cat and they killed him. Is this considered the normal behavior or not? Allegedly, the story is that in the earlier half of the 20th century, there was a problem. Maybe the late 19th century, there's a problem in Jerusalem of too many mice and too many snakes. So they imported in a tremendous amount of cats because a group of cats can kill a snake, and they get rid of the mice pretty quickly. And they all still live in Jerusalem though.
Yeah.
They're in Jerusalem. The cats are legendary, and my wife tells me that the old city cats have their own moniker. They tend to be much bigger and bushier and much more beefy. I guess they have more food. I don't know. Okay. So is this considered meisa machmas malacha? Is this considered dying in the normal course of work, or is it considered unusual that all the rats should gang up on the cat? So Amar Rav Mordechai Rav Ashi Hachi Amar Avimi Agron Yimshmed Rafa. Rabbi Avimi said in the name of Rafa, Gavra de Nashi Katlu Laidina V'Laidaina. A man who was killed by woman, they're not judged for it because it's sort of unusual. And similarly, this seems to be an unusual incident. It would not be an example of meisa machmas malacha. Just make sure I have that. Yeah. Right. Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. So they say because it's so unusual, it is considered meisa machmas malacha. It is considered dying in the normal course of work, and the animal would be exempt. Because it doesn't make sense that a cat shouldn't be able to control itself, to sort of to get back, and even if all the rats gang up on him, the cat should have been able to save himself and kill them.
Husband unexpectedly died. He says he fell prey to members of the weaker sex.
Yeah, no. So just like there would be no redress if a man was killed by a bunch of women. Some say a slightly different version. It ate too many mice, and it sort of it died from eating too much mice or too many rats. Yosef Ravashi, Ravashi was asking, what's the story? In this case, he died not because the woman gained up on him, because he had too much intercourse and he died from too much intercourse. Obviously, there's no redress, and therefore, similarly, this would be an example of normal course of work, and the owner would not be liable for the borrower would not be liable for the cat. Okay, some good advice here. A guy who wants to borrow something and exempt himself. Namely, he should tell the lender, Ashkai Maya, won't you please pour me a drink? To have a shayla b'bailam. At the time that you take possession of the borrowed item, you ask the guy to pour you a drink, get you a cup of water. You're shayla b'bailam and you're exempt now. This is an example of getting a coffee. You have the lender get you a coffee at the time he's giving you, he's loaning you the item, and you're exempt. And if he's a smart man, So please go take the borrowed item, and then I'll give you a drink. And that solves the problem. Amar Rava says, Mikri Daradki, a school teacher. Shasla, this is the guy who propagates vineyards. Or Tafka, butcher. V'umna is a bloodletter, or Safar Masa, a barber. Kulu be'idna v'ditayu k'she'ela b'bailam damu. These people, when they're working, then it's considered as if they're working on the community behalf, doing communal jobs, and therefore, if they loan an item while they're engaged in their work, then the borrower is exempt because of she'ela b'bailam, ba'ol of Yomai. Amalei Rabbanan Rava. So the rabbi said to Rava, Shalom Mar, you are borrowed to us. Meaning, if we ever borrow something from you, we're always going to be exempt because you are owed to us to be the teacher of the town. You're the rabbi of town. You work for all of us. So if we ever borrow something from you, it's she'ela b'bailam. We're always be exempt from ba'ol of Yomai. So Ikbid, so Rava was annoyed by that. Amar lahu, he says, "La'afkui mimunai kabe'isu." You think you're going to take away my money? Adarabba, to the contrary. Atan she'lisan li. You actually are loaned to me. You are all working. You all of you students, you're all working for me. Why? I, as the rabbi, get to choose the topic of the speech, and you have to learn my topic. You have to study my topic. But you don't get to choose the topic. So in that sense, you're considered to be working for me, and I'm not considered to be working for you. So Gemara says, "V'lahi," it's not entirely accurate because before the holiday, the rabbi is obligated to teach the congregation the subject of the holiday, and therefore you the rabbi, are working for the congregation. The rest of the year, it's true that the study group is working for the rabbi because they have to study whatever the rabbi chooses to study. Meremer bar Chanina, Ogar Kudnaisa. He borrowed a mule. I'm sorry, rented from. He leased his mule to the people of Chuzai. Nafak ledeluye tuuna bahadayo. He went out and carried a load for it. Pashubei umis. They were negligent and the animal died. Also, Rava said they have to pay. And second, the lender here was Chanina. Meremer was the lender here. He was working for the people of Chazai at the time of the loan. The people of Chazai should be exempt. It's ba'ol of Yomai. So the Gemara says, "Echsef." Rava was embarrassed. Meremer did not go out to assist. He went out just to observe the proceedings of loading the animals, loading the mule, and therefore, actually, it was true that the people of Chazai were responsible. They had to pay. So Gemara says, this proves to us that we had a debate. Does ba'ol of Yomai exempt you in a scenario of pshia, in a scenario of negligence? Right? Maybe ba'ol of Yomai only exempts you when you're not negligent. But over here, this is clearly an example of negligence. And they want to say ba'ol of Yomai should be exempt. So this clearly shows us that Rava is of the opinion that ba'ol of Yomai would exempt you even for gross negligence. Why was he embarrassed if pshia b'bailam, if gross negligence is not exempted by ba'ol of Yomai? So Gemara says, "Lo mishu pashuba elignu ve'igniv u'meisik adarka." So Gemara says, "No, it wasn't actually gross negligence. It was actually the animal was stolen, and the animal died in the possession of the thief." They went to Rava, and Rava said they had to pay. The rabbi said to Rava, they should be exempt because of ba'ol of Yomai, because Meremer was working for them at the time of the loan. So the Gemara says, if he was embarrassed, Meremer was not actually working, he was just observing the proceedings. And therefore, Rava was justified in requiring the people of Chazai to pay. Have a great day.